All right, y'all. We're going to be doing chapter 32 and I think 33 if I can get through it here in just a few minutes. Before I read, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I love this book. This book, Alabama Moon, I think it's so well written. I love the way that Watt Key describes the scenes, like his show not tell details, I think are fantastic. Yesterday, I remember the squirrels chasing each other and running up the tree. Like it depicted such a good image for me of like Moon sitting in the tree watching the squirrels mess around in the leaves and stuff. Like I just think he does a great job describing what's happening in the story. It's one of the reasons why I love this book. It's just really well written. Something you all can incorporate into your writing that makes you better writers as you guys work in language arts. But one thing I wanted to talk about too, this book, it is a book. It's a work of fiction. There are things that happen in this book that I would not recommend students be a part of. For instance, like finding a gun and then taking it in the forest and shooting it. Like, I know it's the South. I know that that might be more commonplace here than maybe in other areas of the country. But of course, if you're a kid and you find a gun, what should you do? Absolutely 100%. Don't touch it. Don't even think about touching it. Don't go tell your friends. Find a trusted adult right away. Worst case scenario, you can call 911 and let the police come out and handle it, because you don't know if it's a real gun, if it's a fake gun, if it's loaded, if it's not. Just some good common sense and some gun safety, obviously, like that needs to take place. Getting a trusted adult to handle something like that is really the best way to go about it. There's some parts in here where like the Hal's dad picks him up and he's chugging whiskey while he's driving. Of course that is something you should absolutely not do. In fact, it's illegal. You can't drink and drive, and that's dangerous, of course. Hal being, what, I think he's like 14 or something like that. He's not that old, and his dad moves over and lets Hal drive the truck. Now, should you be driving a truck as a kid? Probably not without adult supervision, I guess. Maybe in a clay pit if that's something that your family's okay with, but getting out on the roads and driving illegally, like that is not okay. This is a fiction book. It is not a real story. And of course, I got to do the teacher thing and parent thing and adult thing. Kids should not be doing that. So that's just my word of caution for you guys. Be safe out there and don't do what is in this book. It's just a story, just like when you see that kind of stuff in TV, in the movies and all that, doesn't mean that it's okay for you guys to do, but it does make for a very entertaining story. So when we left off, Moon is staying with Hal and Hal's pap in Hal's pap's trailer. It sounds like he's got quite a good setup with this big old mud pit behind him. He's got guns to shoot. He's got mud pits to play in. He's got a wiener dog, which is kind of weird because when he left, he only had the 2 bloodhounds, but apparently Sanders sent off his dachshund, little wiener dog, to go chase down Moon and Hal, and that turned out the same way as it did with the other 2 dogs. Like the wiener dog just followed him home, and now he's snuggled up on the bed that Moon's going to be sleeping on. So I thought that's a pretty funny part of the story. I like that Watt Key added that into the story because he didn't have to, but it makes it that much more funny, or that much funnier for me. Anyway, so chapter 32, Moon and Hal are hanging out at Hal's place. After my haircut, Hal got some black garbage bags and started taping them over the side of the truck windows with duct tape. What's all that for? Just hold on, skinhead. When he was finished, we got in the truck and we went riding down into the clay pit with the bloodhounds chasing behind. Once we were at the bottom, Hal mashed the gas pedal as far as it would go. The back tires threw mud 50 feet behind us, and we fishtailed until I had to clutch the seat to keep from sliding across the cab. Finally, he straightened the truck out, and we sped toward the opposite side. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "We're mudding!" There's a long strip of mud in the middle of the clay pit that we hit next, and a wall of rust-colored water shot up over the truck, all over us. The truck slowed, and Hal gritted his teeth and floored it again. Clumps of mud clopped against the truck and covered us inch by inch until we could only see through what the windshield wipers scraped clean. "Daddy made some heavy-duty wipers for us," Hal yelled. I was so excited I couldn't even answer. I gripped the seat and I held on. The tires slowly caught the ground. The wall of water fell, and I saw we were still headed straight for the high clay wall of the opposite side. Just as I was about to ball up for a crash, Hal yelled, "Hold on!" And he whipped the steering wheel with one hand. We slid sideways for about 30 feet until we slammed into the clay bank. I saw cans and buckets and trash bags fly into the air through the rear window. Hal grabbed the steering wheel with both hands, and I saw his knuckles go white. "Hammer down!" he shouted, and jabbed his right foot down to the floor. We scraped the side of the bank for a few yards, and then we tore away from him. Man, you're crazy, I yelled. Fun, wasn't it? You're going to bend up your truck. Daddy don't need no Sunday car. Well then, let's go again. Hal's eyes twinkled and he straightened his right leg and we tore off for the other side. The bloodhounds had almost caught up with us and made a wide circle to give chase again. They were so covered with clay mud, all you could see were their eyes like they'd been dipped in tomato sauce. We made 3 runs through the clay pit before Hal said we were low on gas. We drove back up to the trailer and washed the dogs and trucked down with a hose. The afternoon was growing late. My stomach hurt from laughing so hard. After Hal finished washing everything, he gathered up the hose and threw it under the porch. What'd you think about that? He said. Man, that's the most fun I ever had, I said. Hal nodded and ripped one of the garbage bags from a window. Man, you ain't the only one that knows about stuff. What else you got? Well, we'll get Daddy up. He's got a machine gun from Vietnam we can shoot those bottles with. A machine gun? Yeah, a real one. Well, let's go get him then. Hal woke his daddy while I waited outside. Mr. Mitchell came out in his underwear with the machine gun Hal told me about. He had scars across his stomach and tattoos on his shoulders. His underwear was split so thin that it was like literally little more than just yellow cheesecloth. Hal went around the back of the trailer and got some empty bottles from a trash pile and stood them at the edge of the clay pit. I sat behind Mr. Mitchell on the porch and I watched him load his gun. I had heard and read about machine guns, but I'd never seen one before. You know, I can't read without some good coffee. Good coffee from Legacy, which you can find in Columbia, Tennessee. It's my shameless plug for a delicious coffee place. Anyway, where you can get one of those? Mr. Mitchell rubbed his eyes like he was still tired. He scratched under his chin. He scratched under his arms and took a while before he answered me. Well, you just got to kind of ask around. It's pretty loud? Mr. Mitchell nodded. Yep, especially for a man with a headache. Hal came back and stood behind us on the porch. Mr. Mitchell looked at us. You ready? Ready, I said. Mr. Mitchell jerked the machine gun up to his shoulders, and I slammed my hands over my ears as it shot fire from its barrel. All the bottles seemed to blow apart at once and rain down into the clay pit as he swept the barrel once right and then left. I was so excited my ears started to itch. I let my hands down and I yelled, woohoo! Hal ran around the back of the trailer. I heard him picking through the trash pile for more bottles. Mr. Mitchell laid the gun across his legs and looked over at me. You want to try it? Heck yeah! After Hal set up the new bottles and returned, I took the gun from Mr. Mitchell and I brought it to my shoulders. I lined up the iron sights and I put my cheek against the stock. Now, I asked? Make him pay, Moon. I squeezed back on the trigger and the gun exploded. I let off the trigger and watched the one bottle I'd aimed for fall away into the clay pit. Mr. Mitchell told me to move the barrel along the line of bottles when I pulled the trigger and I could get them all. I sucked in my breath, I took aim, and I turned every bottle in the line to glass splinters. You a damn good shot, boy. I told you would be, Hal said. When it was his turn, Hal walked to the edge of the pit and he fired the gun from his hip at the far side. Puffs of dust spit from the clay bank. Before he was done, a giant wall of dirt fell away and slid to the bottom. It was well after dark when Hal and I stopped shooting. Mr. Mitchell had made a seat for himself on the tailgate of the truck and drank whiskey and scratched and chuckled at us. You boys would have been hell and numb, he said. I reckon you two going to be itching them shoulders tonight. Hal made some burgers for supper, and I had never tasted anything better. I ate 2 before I sat on the sofa, and then I held my stomach. Mr. Mitchell watched me. Touch easier than killing your own food, isn't it? Yes, sir, I said. Now, don't hurt yourself over it. You're going to blow up if you don't slow down a little bit. He always eats too much when you give him regular food. Mr. Mitchell played country music on his record player, and he lay back in a big chair across from me, took a pouch of tobacco from a table beside him, and he stuffed some in his cheek. Hal sat on the kitchen counter and pulled his shirt off. He licked a finger and then began to clean his belly button. I love that part. What's today, I asked. Saturday, Hal replied. You got a lot of people coming to get dirt? Mr. Mitchell spit in an empty whiskey bottle beside him. Sometimes, he said. Depends on what they got going construction-wise. I bet you can make a bunch of money selling dirt. You don't ever run out, do you? Mr. Mitchell seemed to think for a few seconds. Well, guess I don't. We gonna go see Kid Hal? How are we gonna do that? They'll catch me or you both, and then they'll take us away. Well, we could maybe sneak into the hospital. Well, he's probably not feeling better yet. Well, I hope he doesn't think I forgot about him. I hope he doesn't think I'm mad at him. I told you we'd call him in a few days. You think he still want to go to Alaska? Moon, what you gonna go to Alaska for? Mr. Mitchell said. I was about to tell him what Pap had told me, but then I didn't. It just didn't seem right anymore. I just been planning on going there for a while, I said. I told Kid I'd take him. Hey, you freeze up there. I don't really care where I go. I just don't want to go by myself. I'd rather live out there in that clay pit than Alaska, Mr. Mitchell said. Clay pits don't bother me. Any place you don't want to live? Pinson, jail, most any place where you get locked up. Makes my insides tighten up like somebody poured bad water down my throat. The wiener dog jumped into my lap and Mr. Mitchell watched it. He spat into the bottle again and said, well, I bet you Sanders' mama raised hell on him from losing that dog. I bet he got lost looking. For you or the dog? We lay in Hal's room that night with the window open because the weather was pleasant. The wiener dog nosed under the blanket with me and lay throbbing against my side. Now, I don't know if any of you have a wiener dog, but wiener dogs love to burrow. I used to have one a number of years ago. His name was Maximus. Like, he was really big, but he was just a small little wiener dog. Wiener dogs love to burrow under covers, like under blankets, under pillows. Like, it's just something that's in their nature, and they love to do that. So it's very classic wiener dog behavior there. I trained my ears to listen for the night sounds, but all I heard was the rustling of pecan trees. What else you got around here? Got a chainsaw. Bet you never used one of them before. Let's go get it. Not now. Is it loud? Yeah. Loud as that machine gun? Nah. Bet you don't have many wild animals around here with all that shooting. Well, Daddy don't shoot it much, just when he's got company. Whew, you're lucky, I said. I know. I could ride in clay pits and shoot machine guns and eat hamburgers for a long time before I get tired of it. Me too. Yeah, and it's good to be back with Daddy again. Yeah, I replied. One of the bloodhounds moaned outside the window. Hal? What? I don't miss my Pap much anymore. How come? I don't know. You think that's bad? No. Hal? I think he might have been wrong about a lot of things. About wanting you to live out there in the forest. I like living in the forest. I don't know where else I'd live, but I just don't want to be by myself. We were always by ourselves. We didn't see anybody except Mr. Abrascato. Why don't you stop thinking about everything so much? Hal? You reckon Kit's all right? He's fine. You know how he hates those hospitals. Well, I'm sure he hates dead a lot more. You know, my Pap didn't seem like he cared if he died. I don't want to die for a long time. Moon, I'm tired. I'm not. This is the best bed I've ever slept in, but I'm not tired. Stay up and talk with me. I'll tell you what. Let's go to sleep, and I'll show you that chainsaw tomorrow. That sounds good to me. I'll stop talking now. At this point in the book, I love Hal as a character. I love that Waukee took an antagonist like the bad guy in a book, Hal. He took a bad guy and actually makes him good, and he makes him lovable and entertaining and funny. And this is now Moon's like new best friend. He's hanging out with the guy that was like a bully ready to beat him up at Pinson. He escapes with him, and now they're like best buddies hanging out, shooting machine guns and driving around in trucks. And Hal and Moon are having the time of their lives. I absolutely love when an author is able to take a character like Hal and switch him around into a completely different character where you think he's going to be the bad guy, and then he turns out that he's actually kind of a good guy, and you really enjoy him as a character. So I love that. I love this part of the book where Hal and Moon are just having a good old time driving around in the mud pit in that truck, mudding, I guess you could call it, and shooting guns and just eating burgers, hanging out, doing the whole thing. That sounds like a good old-fashioned good time to me. Chapter 33. Playing with chainsaws too. Again, kids, don't do that at home. Parents need to watch. It's dangerous, but in the book, seems like it's a pretty awesome time. Chapter 33. The next morning, I lay in bed an hour before daylight watching Hal's eyes and waiting for them to open. He still was asleep. He was still asleep when the sun slipped over the trees, and I felt like I couldn't lie there much longer. I saw the lump of the wiener dog near his stomach. I picked a toothpick off the floor and I tossed it at the lump. The dog rose under the covers and stuck her head out and looked around. Hal opened his eyes, staring at me. "And what are you looking at?" "Just waiting for you to get up." "What time is it?" 30 minutes after daylight? Ugh. Hal moaned and rolled over. "Hey, we gonna do that chainsaw today?" I reminded him. "Why don't you go outside and help Daddy while I sleep?" "He up?" "Yeah, he's probably out in that clay pit." The wiener dog watched me for a few more seconds and then sighed and nosed her way under the blanket. I pulled my clothes on and I left to find Mr. Mitchell. I walked down the road to the clay pit as the sun rose over the pines, which were powdered orange 30 feet up from the clay dust. A hawk soared overhead and a rabbit darted into a brush at the edge of the road. I hadn't gone far when I heard clanking of someone working on a piece of equipment. I rounded a bend in the road and saw Mr. Mitchell leaning underneath the hood of a front-end loader. He wore greasy khaki trousers and was barefoot and shirtless. I walked up behind him and watched him for a few seconds. "Hey," I said. Mr. Mitchell jumped, and bonged his head on the underside of the hood. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," I said. I could sneak up on just about anything without even meaning to. He climbed down from where he stood on the loader. Shovel sat on the ground, held the top of his head with both hands. I watched him rock back and forth, taking deep breaths. Finally, he said, "Damn, Moon. You need some help?" He took one hand from the top of his head and studied it, and then pushed himself up to stand again. He winced and went to lean against the front end loader. "All right," he said. "Why don't you go over there and get some oil out of that shed?" "You know what that looks like?" "No, sir, but I can read." He nodded. "Good. Go get me some that says 400. When I returned with the oil, he was leaning under the hood again. He reached back and I climbed up and put the oil into his hand. "I've never seen an engine up close," I said. "You're lucky. Looks like a bunch of parts." "It is." "How do you know what it all is?" "Well, because I've been running these for close to 25 years. I nodded. "You gonna wash it?" "You don't gotta wash this thing." "You put some dirt in some people's trucks?" Mr. Mitchell began pouring the oil into the engine. He looked at me while the can drained. "Maybe," he said. "It's Sunday, so might not be anybody around till noon. Hey, where's that boy of mine?" "He's bedded down with that wiener dog." Mr. Mitchell spit to the side and shook his head. "You got the twitching in there, didn't you?" "Yes, sir. I can't sleep much past daybreak unless I'm in jail where there aren't any windows." He looked at the oil can, shook the last out of it. He tossed it into the weeds and then shut the hood. I climbed down after him and followed into the shed where we sat on 5-gallon buckets. Mr. Mitchell pulled some chewing tobacco from his pocket and packed his cheek full. I watched him work the wad around and spit a long line of juice. "You know what I can't figure?" he said. I was watching the brown spit bead in the dust. I shook my head. "Why your pappy want to live out in the woods like he did?" "Well, he hated the government." "Well, what started all that business?" "I don't know. Your pappy have any friends?" I shook my head. Only person we ever talked to after Mama died was Mr. Abrscotto. He had that store up the road. "You know your pappy for a long time?" "Yes, sir," I nodded. "Ever since we lived in the forest." "Well, maybe he knows." "I don't think he'd tell me anything. I whipped up on him pretty good." "You ain't gonna whip up on me, are you?" "No, sir. I'm done whipping up on people." Mr. Mitchell spit and chuckled to himself. I heard the dogs barking up the road and turned to see Hal coming toward us with the bloodhounds jumping up at him. When Hal stood before us, Mr. Mitchell suddenly leaped up and put him in a playful headlock. Hal began punching him in the stomach. Mr. Mitchell looked up at me and smiled. "Ain't nothing for me to find somebody to whip up on." "Crap, Daddy!" Hal's muffled cry came. "Man, your underarm smells like horse piss." Mr. Mitchell let him go. Hal stumbled backwards, wiped his face with his shirt and spit on the ground. Then he looked up at me and laughed. "Come on, kick his butt, Moon." "You boys go have some fun," Mr. Mitchell said. "I'm going to go get me a 6-pack and sit up under that loader till I got buzzards roosting on me." "It won't work," I said. "Well, we'll see." "We're going to get a chainsaw and go cut some of them big trees that fell in the storm," Hal said. "Moon ain't never used a chainsaw." By noon, we stacked up a giant pile of tree parts. Hal sat in the branches of a large top and chewed tobacco while I busied myself inspecting an abandoned squirrel nest. Hal spit and he asked me, "Anything in there?" "No, baby squirrels make good pets though." "I got enough pets already." I walked up the trunk where Hal was and sat across from him. He held out a bag of Red Man chewing tobacco. "You want some?" "Ugh, why would I want some of that?" "'Cause it's good, dumbass." I shook my head. "Fine then," he said. "Daddy left it in the truck." "Your daddy lets you live just about any way you want, doesn't he?" Hal shut his eyes and worked the tobacco in his cheek. "Just about." "Hal?" "What?" "Why do you think my pap made me live the way he did?" "I don't know." "Your daddy said he can't figure it out either." "Well, maybe some people were after him." "He always thought the government was after him." "Well, and there you go." "Why were they after him, though?" "Hell, Moon, I don't know. You ain't out there no more, so no sense worrying about it." I could tell Hal didn't have any answers for me, so I lay back and we both napped under the pine needles. That night I got a pencil and paper from Hal and I wrote Pap a letter on the kitchen counter. "Dear Pap." You can actually see the words there. "Dear Pap, I know it's been a long time since I've written anything more than a couple words to you. If you could see me, then you know where all I've been. You know I haven't had anything but pine bark to write on, and that doesn't make for an easy letter. Sometimes I wonder if you really get these words in the smoke. Seeing as I don't ever hear from you, I made decisions I don't know if you'll like. I decided not to go to Alaska at all if I gotta be alone. I don't think I can live like you wanted me to live. I think I'd be too lonely. Why'd we have to live out there like we did, Pap? Why couldn't I have any friends? I'm going to go talk to Mr. Abiscato again. I don't know what to do, but I'm not mad at you, Pap. Love, Moon." "Hey, Hal?" "Yeah?" "You got some matches I can burn?" "You can burn it on the stove." "All right."